My name is Sarah, and I'm 24 years old. For the past 8 years, I believed I was contributing to our household expenses by giving my father $300 every month. I thought I was being responsible, helping out with groceries and utilities while I finished high school and worked my way through community college. What I discovered 3 weeks ago turned my entire world upside down and made me question everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and the man who raised me. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, it was just my dad Marcus and me for as long as I could remember. My mother walked out when I was barely 3 years old, leaving behind nothing but a note saying she couldn't handle the responsibility of motherhood. Dad never spoke badly about her, never filled my head with bitter stories or angry words. Instead, he simply stepped up and became both parents to me, working double shifts at the auto repair shop he owned to make sure we never went without. Our house on Maple Street was nothing fancy, a modest 2-bedroom ranch with beige siding and a small front yard that Dad kept meticulously maintained. The interior was sparse but clean, furnished with practical pieces that had seen better days but served their purpose. Dad had converted the basement into his workshop, where he would tinker with old car parts and restore vintage motorcycles in his spare time. The sound of his tools and the smell of motor oil became the soundtrack and scent of my childhood. Dad was a man of few words but consistent actions. Every morning at 5:30 he would wake up, make coffee in the same chipped blue mug he had used for years, and prepare breakfast for both of us. Usually scrambled eggs and toast, sometimes pancakes on weekends. He would pack my lunch in a brown paper bag with my name written in his careful block letters, always including a small note with encouraging words like, "Have a great day, kiddo," or, "Remember, you're stronger than you think." When I was in elementary school, Dad would drop me off on his way to work, his old pickup truck rumbling to a stop in front of Lincoln Elementary. He would always wait until I was safely inside the building before driving away. After school, I would walk to his shop, a 10-minute journey through our quiet neighborhood that I knew by heart. The shop was my second home, and Dad's employees became like uncles to me. Tony, the head mechanic, would show me how to identify different car parts. Miguel would let me help organize his toolbox. And Mrs. Chen, who handled the books, would help me with my homework at the small desk Dad had set up in the corner of the office. Those afternoons at the shop are some of my fondest memories. I would do my homework while listening to the sounds of engines running and tools clanking. Dad would check on me between customers, ruffling my hair or bringing me a snack from the vending machine. When I finished my schoolwork, he would sometimes let me help with simple tasks, like sorting bolts or wiping down tools. He taught me the names of different wrenches and showed me how to check oil levels and tire pressure. As I got older, Dad began involving me more in the business side of things. He would explain how much parts cost, how to estimate repair times, and why customer service was so important. "Sarah," he would say, "this shop puts food on our table and keeps a roof over our heads. Every customer who walks through that door trusts us with something important to them. We never forget that responsibility." The relationship between Dad and me was built on mutual respect and understanding. He treated me like a young adult even when I was still a child, explaining his decisions and asking for my input on family matters. When I was 12 and wanted to join the school soccer team, he sat down with me to go over the costs and time commitment. When I was 14 and got my first part-time job babysitting for neighbors, he helped me open my first bank account and taught me about saving money. Dad had a way of teaching life lessons through everyday situations. When I accidentally broke Mrs. Peterson's garden gnome while playing in her yard, Dad made me work extra chores to earn money to replace it. When I got a C- on a math test because I hadn't studied enough, he didn't yell or punish me. Instead, he sat down with me that evening and helped me understand where I had gone wrong. "Consequences are life's way of teaching us," he would say. "The goal isn't to avoid them completely, but to learn from them when they happen." Our weekend routine was sacred. Saturday mornings were for household chores, but Dad made them enjoyable by playing classic rock music and turning cleaning into a game. We would race to see who could vacuum their assigned rooms faster, or compete to see who could fold laundry more neatly. Saturday afternoons were for fun activities together. Sometimes we would go to the local arcade, sometimes to a movie, sometimes just for a drive through the desert outside town. Sunday mornings were for pancakes and cartoons, followed by whatever project Dad was working on in the basement. He taught me how to use basic tools, how to sand wood properly, and how to paint without leaving brush marks. When I turned 16, everything changed. Dad sat me down at our kitchen table on a Thursday evening in March, the same table where we had eaten thousands of meals together and where I had done countless hours of homework. His expression was serious, more formal than usual. He had a manila folder in front of him, which he opened carefully. "Sarah, you're becoming a young woman now," he began, his voice taking on a tone I had never heard before. "It's time we had a conversation about responsibility and contributing to this household." I remember feeling confused at first. I already had responsibilities around the house. I did my own laundry, kept my room clean, helped with cooking and cleaning, and maintained good grades at school. I wondered what more he could want from me. Dad pulled out a sheet of paper covered with numbers and calculations. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and I've decided that it's time for you to start paying rent. $300 a month. This will cover your portion of the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and other household expenses." I stared at him in shock. Rent? At 16? None of my friends paid rent to their parents. I had never heard of such a thing. "But Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I don't have $300. I only make about $200 a month babysitting." "Then you'll need to find more work," he replied matter-of-factly. "There are plenty of part-time jobs available for someone your age. The grocery store, fast food restaurants, retail shops. You're smart and responsible. You'll figure it out." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. This was my father, the man who had protected and provided for me my entire life, suddenly asking me to pay for the privilege of living in my own home. "Is this because money is tight?" I asked. "Is the shop not doing well?" "Because if that's the case, I understand, and I want to help." Dad's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "The shop is doing fine, Sarah. This isn't about financial necessity. This is about teaching you responsibility and preparing you for the real world. When you turn 18 and move out, you'll need to pay rent wherever you live. Consider this practice." He went on to explain that many parents charge their teenage children rent as a way to teach them about money management and adult responsibilities. He said he had researched it and found that it was becoming more common among families who wanted to prepare their children for independence. "I'm not doing this to punish you," he insisted. "I'm doing this because I love you and want you to be prepared for life." The conversation continued for over an hour. Dad showed me his calculations, breaking down what he claimed were the U.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Actual costs of supporting me. According to his figures, my share of the mortgage was $120. Utilities came to $45. Food was another $100. Miscellaneous expenses like toiletries, clothing allowance, and household items brought the total to $300 exactly. "But what about all the things you've been paying for anyway?" I asked. "The mortgage, the utilities, the food. You were paying those whether I lived here or not." "That's true," Dad acknowledged. "But now that you're old enough to contribute, it's only fair that you do so. Think of it as your entry into adulthood." Despite my confusion and hurt feelings, I wanted to make Dad proud. I had always been an obedient daughter, always tried to meet his expectations and live up to his standards. If this was what he believed was best for me, then I would find a way to make it work. "Okay," I said finally, "I'll find another job. But can I have a few weeks to get something set up?" Dad smiled then, the first genuine smile he had shown during our entire conversation. "Of course. You can start paying at the beginning of next month. And Sarah, I want you to know how proud I am of you for being so mature about this. Not every teenager would handle this conversation as well as you have." Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into job hunting with the same determination I applied to everything else in my life. I applied at the grocery store where I had been shopping with Dad since I was little. I filled out applications at 3 different fast food restaurants. I inquired about part-time positions at the local library, the movie theater, and several retail stores at the mall. The grocery store called me back first. They offered me a position as a courtesy clerk, working 15 hours a week at minimum wage. It wasn't enough to cover the $300 rent Dad expected, so I kept looking. A week later, the movie theater offered me a job selling concessions on weekends. Between the 2 jobs, I would be working about 25 hours a week and earning just enough to meet Dad's requirements. My first rent payment was due on April 1st. I remember the date specifically because it felt like some sort of cosmic joke. April Fool's Day seemed like an appropriate time to hand over money to my father for the right to sleep in the bedroom I had occupied my entire life. I had earned exactly $312 from my 2 jobs, which left me with $12 for any personal expenses. Dad was waiting for me in the kitchen when I got home from school that day. He had prepared a simple receipt book, the kind small businesses use for cash transactions. "Right on time," he said as I counted out 15 $20 bills. He wrote me a receipt, received from Sarah Johnson, $300 for April rent and household expenses. He signed it with a flourish and handed me the yellow copy. "Keep this for your records," he advised. "It's important to maintain documentation of all your financial transactions. This will help you learn good money management habits." As I took the receipt, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride that I had managed to earn the money Dad expected, confusion about why this was necessary, and a deep sadness that I couldn't quite identify or understand. Something fundamental had changed in our relationship, and I wasn't sure what it meant or where it would lead. The pattern continued, month after month. I would work my 2 part-time jobs, earn my money, and dutifully hand it over to Dad on the 1st of each month. He always gave me a receipt, always praised me for being responsible, and always reminded me that this arrangement was preparing me for real-world independence. I saved every receipt in a small box in my bedroom, creating a paper trail of my contributions to our household. Working 25 hours a week while maintaining full-time student status was exhausting. My grades began to slip slightly as I struggled to balance schoolwork with job responsibilities. I had to quit the soccer team because practice conflicted with my work schedule at the movie theater. I stopped hanging out with friends as much because I was either working or too tired from working to be social. When I complained about being tired, Dad would remind me that this was excellent preparation for adult life. "Working hard builds character," he would say. "You're learning valuable lessons that will serve you well when you're on your own." Some of my friends thought the arrangement was unfair. "Your dad is charging you rent?" My best friend Jessica asked in disbelief when I explained why I couldn't go to the movies with her and our other friends. "That's crazy. My parents would never make me pay to live at home." But I defended Dad's decision, repeating the explanations he had given me about responsibility and preparation for independence. Deep down, though, I sometimes wondered if Jessica was right. Was this normal? Was this really helping me? Or was it just making my teenage years unnecessarily difficult? The doubt grew stronger during my senior year of high school when I began applying to colleges. I had always assumed I would attend Arizona State University, which was close enough that I could live at home and commute to save money. But when I calculated the costs of tuition, books, and other expenses on top of the $300 monthly rent I was paying Dad, the numbers didn't add up. "Dad," I said one evening as we were eating dinner, "I've been looking at college costs, and I don't think I can afford to go to ASU and pay rent here at the same time. Even with financial aid and working part-time, it's going to be tight." Dad considered this for a moment, chewing thoughtfully on his meatloaf. "Well," he said finally, "you have a few options. You could take out student loans to cover the shortfall. You could work more hours to earn more money. Or you could look into community college for your first 2 years, which would be significantly cheaper." I felt deflated. I had worked hard in high school, maintained a B+ average despite working 25 hours a week, and had been looking forward to the full university experience. Community college wasn't necessarily a bad choice, but it felt like a step backward from my original plans. "What if I didn't pay rent while I'm in college?" I asked tentatively. "Just temporarily until I graduate and get a full-time job?" Dad's expression grew stern. "Sarah, we've talked about this. You're an adult now. or you will be when you turn 18. Adults pay their own way. I'm not running a charity here." His words stung more than I expected. A charity? Was that how he saw providing for his daughter? I had never thought of our home as a place where I needed to earn my right to belong. I ended up choosing the community college route, enrolling at Phoenix Community College for my first 2 years with plans to transfer to ASU later. It was a practical decision that would save money and allow me to continue living at home while paying Dad's rent. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was compromising my dreams because of a financial arrangement that didn't quite make sense to me. Community college turned out to be a positive experience in many ways. The classes were smaller, the professors were accessible, and I was able to maintain better grades without the pressure of a full university workload. I continued working my 2 part-time jobs and paying Dad $300 every month like clockwork. During my second year of community college, I began working additional hours at the grocery store and picked up occasional babysitting jobs to earn extra money. Dad noticed my increased income and made a suggestion that caught me off guard. "Sarah, I've been thinking," he said one evening as I handed him my monthly rent payment. "You're earning more money now, and you're using more resources around the house. Maybe it's time to increase your contribution to $400 a month." I felt a familiar sinking sensation in my stomach. "More resources? What do you mean?" "Well, you're older now, so you eat more. You're using more hot water for longer showers. You have friends over more often, which increases our utility costs. And you're using the internet more for school and personal use. 400 seems more appropriate for your current situation." I stared at him in disbelief. Every time I managed to get ahead financially, Dad found a reason to increase my expenses. It felt like a moving target that I would never be able to hit. "Dad, I'm working as much as I can while still going to school full-time. If I pay $400 a month, I won't have anything left over for savings or emergencies." "Welcome to adult life," he replied with what seemed like satisfaction. "Most adults live paycheck to paycheck. This is excellent training for what you'll face when you're completely on your own." Reluctantly, I agreed to the increase. What choice did I have? This was my father, my home, the only family I had. I found a third part-time job cleaning offices in the evenings, and increased my working hours to nearly 40 per week. My grades suffered, and I was constantly exhausted, but I managed to make the higher payment each month. The stress of working so much while going to school began to take its toll on my health and emotional well-being. I was drinking too much coffee to stay awake, eating poorly because I rarely had time to cook, and feeling constantly anxious about money. I lost weight that I couldn't afford to lose and developed dark circles under my eyes that concealer couldn't fully hide. My professors began to notice my declining performance and energy levels. Dr. Martinez, my psychology instructor, asked me to stay after class one day to discuss my recent absences and late assignments. "Sarah, you're obviously a bright student, but you seem overwhelmed," she said with genuine concern. "Is everything okay at home? Are you dealing with any personal issues that are affecting your academic performance?" I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to explain that I was working nearly 40 hours a week to pay rent to my father while trying to maintain full-time student status. I wanted to ask if this was normal, if other students were facing similar challenges. But something held me back. Loyalty to Dad, maybe, or embarrassment about our family situation. "I'm just working a lot to pay for school," I said vaguely. "It's hard to balance everything sometimes." Dr. Martinez nodded sympathetically. "Have you looked into financial aid options? There are work-study programs that might be less demanding than outside employment. And there are grants and scholarships available for students in your situation." I thanked her for the information and promised to look into it, but I knew Dad would never approve of me taking on debt or accepting what he would consider charity. He had made it clear that I was expected to pay my own way through life, and that included both rent and educational expenses. As I prepared to transfer to Arizona State University for my junior year, I faced a difficult decision. The university was 30 minutes away from home, which would make commuting challenging with my work schedule. Many of my community college friends were planning to live in apartments near campus or in the university dormitories. When I mentioned the possibility of moving closer to campus, Dad's reaction was immediate and negative. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. "Do you have any idea how much rent costs in Tempe? You'd be paying at least $800 a month for a decent apartment, plus utilities, plus groceries. You're much better off staying here and commuting." I had to admit he had a point. $800 was significantly more than the $400 I was paying him. But I couldn't help wondering if the freedom and independence of having my own place might be worth the extra cost. I would be able to set my own schedule, have friends over without asking permission, and not have to worry about whether I was using too many resources or eating too much food. In the end, I decided to stay home and commute to ASU. It was the financially responsible choice, the practical choice, the choice Dad approved of. But as I drove to campus each day, stuck in traffic for an hour round trip, I often wondered what my college experience might have been like if I had been able to make different choices. My junior year at ASU was academically challenging but rewarding. I was finally taking upper-level courses in my major, business administration, and I felt like I was making real progress toward my degree and career goals. However, the commute and work schedule continued to limit my ability to fully engage with university life. I couldn't stay on campus for study groups or social events because I had to get home for work or to avoid driving in the dark. It was during this time that I began to seriously question the financial arrangement with Dad. I had been paying him rent for over 3 years, during which time I had also been contributing to household chores, maintaining good grades, and working multiple jobs. I had grown into a responsible, hardworking young woman, but I wondered if Dad's system was actually helping me prepare for independence, or simply making me dependent on his approval and his rules. One evening, as I was organizing my financial records for tax purposes, I sat down with my box of rent receipts and did some calculations. Over the course of 3.5 years, I had paid Dad a total of $13,200 in rent. That was enough money to have covered most of my first year's tuition at ASU, or to have made a significant down payment on a car, or to have built up a substantial emergency fund. Where had that money gone? Dad's mortgage was the same as it had been when I started paying rent. The utilities hadn't increased significantly. Groceries cost roughly the same. I began to wonder if Dad was actually using my rent money for household expenses, or if he was saving it for some other purpose. The thought that had been lurking in the back of my mind for months finally crystallized into a concrete suspicion. What if Dad wasn't using my rent money for household expenses at all? What if he was saving it for my future, planning to give it back to me when I graduated or got married or bought my first house? It would be exactly the kind of thing Dad would do, teaching me responsibility while secretly protecting my financial future. The idea filled me with hope and relief. It would mean that all the exhaustion, all the sacrifice, all the missed opportunities had been worth it. Dad had been looking out for me all along, just in a way I hadn't understood. I imagined him surprising me on graduation day with a check for the full amount I had paid him, maybe even with interest, to help me start my adult life with a solid financial foundation. I began to look for clues that might confirm my suspicions. I paid more attention to Dad's spending habits, looking for signs that he had extra money available. I noticed that he had been making some improvements to the house, updating the kitchen appliances and replacing the old carpeting in the living room. But these seemed like normal maintenance expenses for a homeowner, not evidence of secret savings. As my senior year approached, I decided to have a conversation with Dad about my post-graduation plans. I had been applying for entry-level positions in business and marketing, and several companies had expressed interest in interviewing me. Some of the opportunities were in other cities, which would require me to relocate after graduation. "Dad," I said one Sunday morning as we shared our traditional pancake breakfast, "I wanted to talk to you about what happens after I graduate. I've been getting some interest from companies in Denver and San Diego, and I'm wondering if you think I should consider relocating for the right opportunity." Dad looked up from his newspaper, considering my question carefully. "Well, that depends on several factors. What kind of salary are these companies offering? What would your living expenses be in those cities? You need to make sure the financial benefits outweigh the costs of moving." We spent the next hour discussing the practical aspects of potentially relocating after college. Dad helped me calculate the costs of moving, finding an apartment, and establishing myself in a new city. As always, he was thorough and practical in his analysis. Of course, he added toward the end of our conversation, you always have the option of staying here for a while after graduation. You could continue paying rent and save up money while you look for the perfect opportunity. There's no rush to move out immediately. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest at the mention of continuing to pay rent after graduation. The idea of working a full-time professional job while still paying Dad $400 a month to live in my childhood bedroom felt depressing and infantilizing. Actually, Dad, I've been thinking about that, I said carefully. Do you think it might be time to stop charging me rent once I graduate? I mean, I'll be working full-time and saving up to move out eventually. Dad's expression grew serious, the same expression he had worn when he first told me about the rent arrangement 4 years earlier. Sarah, we've discussed this before. Adults pay their own way. If anything, I should probably increase your rent to reflect current market rates for someone with a college degree and a professional job. My heart sank. There it was again, the moving target that always seemed to stay just out of reach. No matter how much I accomplished or how responsible I became, Dad always found a reason to increase my financial obligations, rather than decrease them. But, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, I've been paying you rent for 4 years now. I've worked multiple jobs throughout college while maintaining good grades. I think I've proven that I'm responsible and capable of managing money. Isn't that what this was supposed to teach me? The lessons never stop, Sarah, Dad replied firmly. Life is expensive, and the sooner you accept that reality, the better prepared you'll be for independence. I'm doing you a favor by keeping your expenses reasonable while you build up your career. I wanted to argue further, but something in Dad's tone told me the conversation was over. I had learned over the years to recognize when his mind was made up, and this was clearly one of those times. I finished my pancakes in silence, feeling more discouraged about my future than I had in a long time. As my graduation day approached, I found myself both excited and anxious about what came next. I had accepted a position with a marketing firm in Phoenix, which would allow me to stay in the area while I gained professional experience. The job offered a decent starting salary and good benefits, but after calculating my expenses, including the rent Dad expected me to pay, I realized I would have very little money left over for savings or discretionary spending. The night before graduation, I lay in bed thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 4 years of working multiple jobs while going to school. 4 years of paying rent to live in my own home. $13,200 handed over to my father in small monthly installments. I felt proud of what I had accomplished, but also exhausted and somewhat resentful of the unnecessary obstacles that had made the journey more difficult than it needed to be. Graduation day arrived with typical Arizona sunshine and a gentle breeze that made the outdoor ceremony comfortable, despite the late spring heat. Dad was there in the audience, beaming with pride as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. After the ceremony, he gave me a huge hug and told me how proud he was of everything I had achieved. "You did it, kiddo," he said, using the childhood nickname he rarely employed anymore. 4 years of college while working and paying your own way. Not many kids your age can say that. I smiled and thanked him, but part of me was waiting for something more. A surprise announcement, maybe, or a hint about what would happen to all the money I had paid him over the years. But the moment passed without any revelations, and we went to dinner to celebrate my achievement, just like any other special occasion. Over the next few weeks, as I prepared to start my new job, I kept expecting Dad to bring up the subject of my rent payments or my transition to full-time employment. I thought he might want to discuss adjusting our arrangement now that I would be earning a professional salary rather than working part-time minimum wage jobs. But he didn't bring it up, so eventually I did. "Dad," I said one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner, "I wanted to talk about the rent situation now that I'm starting my career. Do you think we could discuss making some adjustments?" "What kind of adjustments?" he asked, continuing to load dishes into the dishwasher without looking at me. "Well, I was hoping that maybe we could reduce the amount, at least temporarily while I build up some savings," I said hopefully. "Or maybe establish a timeline for when I might be able to stop paying rent altogether and focus on saving up to move out." Dad finished loading the dishwasher and turned to face me, his expression serious. Sarah, I think you're misunderstanding something fundamental here. The rent you pay isn't a punishment or a temporary teaching tool. It's a legitimate expense for living in this house. You're an adult now with a college degree and a professional job. If anything, your contribution should increase to reflect your improved earning potential. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. After 4 years of hoping and believing that this arrangement was temporary, that it was all part of some larger plan to help me succeed, Dad was telling me that it was simply the new permanent reality of our relationship. But Dad, I said, struggling to keep my composure, I'm your daughter. This is my family home. I grew up here. Doesn't that mean anything? His expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. Of course it means something. You'll always be my daughter, and this will always be your family home. But that doesn't change the fact that you're an adult who needs to contribute to the household expenses. I'm not asking you to pay market rate for rent in this area, which would be much higher. I'm asking you to pay a fair share of the actual costs of maintaining this household. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom surrounded by the possessions and memories of my youth, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my life. I was going to move out, not because I wanted to abandon my father, or because I was angry about the rent, but because I needed to understand what financial independence actually looked like. I had been so focused on meeting Dad's expectations and proving my responsibility that I had never really experienced true autonomy. I had never made my own budget based on my own priorities. I had never had the freedom to make financial mistakes and learn from them without someone else controlling the consequences. The next morning, I began looking at apartment listings online. What I found confirmed what Dad had told me about market rates. Most decent one-bedroom apartments in Phoenix were renting for between $800 and $1,200 per month, significantly more than the $400 I was paying Dad. But as I looked at the listings, I began to understand something I hadn't fully grasped before. When I paid $800 for my own apartment, I would get more than just a place to sleep. I would get complete control over my living space, my schedule, my guests, and my lifestyle. I would get the freedom to make my own rules and live by my own standards. I would also get the responsibility of managing all my own expenses, from utilities to groceries to maintenance. It would be more expensive, but it would also be entirely mine. For the first time in 4 years, I felt excited about the prospect of financial independence rather than overwhelmed by it. Finding an apartment that fit my budget and met my needs took several weeks of searching. I finally settled on a small one-bedroom unit in a complex, about 15 minutes from my new job. It was nothing fancy, but it was clean, safe, and affordable. The rent was $850 per month, plus utilities, which would stretch my budget but remain manageable with careful planning. The hardest part was telling Dad about my decision. I had been dreading the conversation for weeks, knowing that he would probably see my move as ingratitude or rejection of everything he had taught me about responsibility and financial management. I chose a quiet Sunday evening to bring up the subject, hoping that the relaxed atmosphere might make the conversation easier. Dad, I said as we sat in the living room watching television, I wanted to let you know that I've found an apartment and I'm planning to move out at the end of next month. Dad looked surprised, then hurt, then angry in rapid succession. Move out? Why? Is this about the rent? Because if you think you're going to find a better deal somewhere else, you're going to be disappointed. It's not about finding a better deal, I said carefully. It's about experiencing real independence and taking full responsibility for my own life. I appreciate everything you've taught me about money management and responsibility, but I think it's time for me to apply those lessons in my own place. This is your own place, Dad replied, his voice rising slightly. You've been contributing to this household for 4 years. You have just as much right to be here as I do. His words confused me. If I had just as much right to be here as he did, why was I paying rent to live here? Why were my expenses constantly increasing rather than decreasing as I became more established? Why did I feel like a tenant in my own family home rather than a family member who happened to contribute to expenses? Dad, I understand what you're saying, but I don't feel like this is my place, I said honestly. I feel like I'm renting a room from you, not sharing a home with you. I want to experience what it's like to have my own space, to make my own rules, and to manage my own household. Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at the television screen without really watching it. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer but still strained. "I've been trying to prepare you for the real world, Sarah. I've been teaching you lessons that most young people don't learn until it's too late. You think moving out is going to be some great adventure, but it's going to be a rude awakening when you realize how expensive life really is." "Maybe it will be," I acknowledged. "But those are lessons I need to learn for myself. I need to make my own mistakes and figure out my own solutions. That's part of growing up, isn't it?" Dad nodded reluctantly, but I could see that he wasn't happy about my decision. "Fine," he said finally. "If that's what you want to do, I won't try to stop you. But don't come crying to me when you realize that the grass isn't greener on the other side." Moving day arrived on a Saturday in late August. Dad helped me load my belongings into a rental truck, but his demeanor was distant and formal. It felt like he was helping a stranger rather than his own daughter. As I packed the last of my things, I felt a mixture of excitement and sadness that I hadn't expected. This was the end of an era, the conclusion of my childhood and the beginning of something entirely new. I was leaving behind the only home I had ever known, the place where I had grown up and learned so many important lessons. But I was also stepping into a future that belonged entirely to me, with all the freedom and responsibility that entailed. My new apartment felt enormous compared to my childhood bedroom, even though it was objectively quite small. Having my own kitchen, my own bathroom, my own living room was intoxicating. I spent the first few days just walking around, touching my furniture, adjusting my decorations, and marveling at the fact that this space was completely mine. The financial reality of independent living hit quickly and hard. My first month's expenses included rent, security deposit, utility setup fees, groceries, household supplies, and basic necessities I had never had to think about when living with Dad. By the end of September, I had spent nearly $2,000 just getting established in my new life. But despite the financial stress, I felt more satisfied and content than I had in years. I was making my own decisions about everything from what to eat for breakfast to what time to go to bed. I could have friends over without asking permission, watch whatever I wanted on television, and keep my space organized according to my own preferences. I also began to understand how household finances actually worked. When I paid $850 in rent, I knew exactly where that money was going. It was covering my portion of the building's mortgage, property taxes, maintenance, and management fees. When I paid $75 for utilities, I could see the direct correlation between my usage and the bills. When I spent $200 on groceries, I was feeding only myself and making choices based on my own preferences and budget. For the first time in 4 years, I felt like I had a clear understanding of my financial situation. I could see exactly how much money was coming in and exactly where it was going out. There were no mysterious increases, no moving targets, no explanations about market rates or adult responsibilities that didn't quite add up. My relationship with Dad became strained during those first few months of independent living. He rarely called, and when I called him, our conversations were brief and awkward. When I invited him to see my apartment, he declined, saying he was too busy with work. When I suggested meeting for dinner, he said he preferred to eat at home where the food was better and cheaper. I could tell he was hurt by my decision to move out, and part of me felt guilty about that. But I also felt frustrated by his inability to understand my need for independence. I wasn't rejecting him or the lessons he had taught me. I was simply applying those lessons in my own life, in my own way. The guilt intensified when I realized how much I missed our daily interactions. I missed our Sunday morning pancake breakfasts, our conversations about work and life, and even our disagreements about money and responsibility. Living alone was wonderful in many ways, but it was also lonely in ways I hadn't anticipated. 3 months after moving out, I decided to surprise Dad by stopping by the house on a Sunday morning with ingredients for pancakes. I thought maybe we could recreate our old tradition and begin to repair our relationship. When I knocked on the front door, it took him several minutes to answer, and when he did, he looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. "I brought pancake mix and fresh blueberries," I said, holding up the grocery bag. I thought maybe we could have breakfast together like we used to. Dad smiled for the first time since I had moved out. That sounds nice, he said. I haven't made pancakes in months. As we worked together in the kitchen, mixing batter and heating the griddle, it felt like old times. We talked about my job, his work at the shop, and the changes he had been making to the house. The conversation was easier and more natural than it had been in a long time. How are you managing financially? Dad asked as we sat down to eat. I imagine it's been an adjustment, dealing with all those expenses on your own. It has been challenging, I admitted, but I'm learning a lot about budgeting and prioritizing expenses. It's actually kind of satisfying to know exactly where every dollar is going. Dad nodded thoughtfully. That's good. Financial awareness is an important skill. I hope the lessons you learned here have been helpful in managing your own household. They have been, I said, and I meant it. Despite my complicated feelings about the rent arrangement, I had to acknowledge that Dad's emphasis on financial responsibility had prepared me well for independent living. I knew how to budget, how to prioritize expenses, and how to live within my means. After breakfast, Dad showed me the improvements he had been making to the house. He had installed new hardwood floors in the hallway, updated the bathroom fixtures, and painted the exterior trim. The house looked better than it had in years, fresh and well-maintained. These updates must have been expensive, I commented as we toured the improvements. They were, Dad agreed, but the house needed the work, and I had some money saved up for improvements. Something about his phrasing caught my attention. Money saved up. I wondered if any of the rent money I had paid him over the years had contributed to these improvements. But I didn't ask, not wanting to spoil the good mood we had finally managed to achieve. Our relationship began to improve gradually over the following months. I visited Dad regularly, and he eventually agreed to see my apartment. He seemed impressed by how well I had furnished and organized the space on a limited budget, and he complimented me on my financial management skills. You've done a good job here, he said as we sat in my small living room drinking coffee. The place feels like home. Thanks, Dad. It means a lot to hear you say that. As winter approached, I found myself in a comfortable routine. Work was going well, and I had received a small raise that helped ease my budget constraints. I was building friendships with coworkers and neighbors, creating a social life that was entirely my own. Most importantly, I was developing confidence in my ability to handle whatever challenges life might throw at me. It was during this period of growing confidence and stability that I decided to tackle a project I had been putting off since moving out. I wanted to organize all my financial records and create a comprehensive budget that would help me save for future goals like buying a car or eventually purchasing a house. I spread all my documents across my kitchen table one Saturday afternoon. Bank statements, pay stubs, receipts, and the box of rent receipts I had saved from my years of paying Dad. As I worked through the paperwork, categorizing expenses and calculating totals, I found myself returning again and again to that box of rent receipts. $13,200. The number seemed even more significant now that I understood the true cost of independent living. That amount of money could have covered my current rent for 15 months. It could have purchased a reliable used car. It could have provided a substantial emergency fund or down payment for a future home purchase. Where had that money gone? The question that had been lurking in the back of my mind for years became impossible to ignore. I knew Dad's house payments hadn't increased during the time I was paying rent. I knew his utility bills hadn't doubled. I knew he wasn't buying significantly more groceries or household supplies. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Dad had been saving my rent money for some purpose. Maybe he had been setting it aside for my future, planning to surprise me with it when I got married or bought my first house. Maybe he had invested it and was waiting for it to grow before giving it back to me. Maybe he was saving it for his own retirement, which would indirectly benefit me as his only heir. But as months passed without any mention of the money or any indication that Dad had plans to return it to me, I began to consider other possibilities. What if he had simply been keeping the money for himself? What if the entire rent arrangement had been less about teaching me responsibility and more about supplementing his income? The thought was disturbing and felt disloyal, but I couldn't shake it entirely. Dad had made improvements to the house that must have cost thousands of dollars. He had mentioned having money saved up for these projects. Was it possible that my rent payments had funded these improvements rather than covering actual household expenses? I tried to dismiss these suspicions as ungrateful and paranoid. Dad had raised me alone, worked hard to provide for me, and taught me valuable lessons about responsibility and financial management. Even if he had used some of my rent money for house improvements, wasn't that his right as the homeowner and the parent who had supported me for the first 16 years of my life? But the doubts persisted, especially when I calculated how much money I might have saved if I hadn't been paying rent during college. I could have graduated debt-free instead of taking out small student loans. I could have had a substantial emergency fund when I moved out. I could have afforded a nicer apartment or been able to save for long-term goals from the beginning of my career. Spring arrived with its typical Arizona intensity, bringing temperatures that quickly climbed from pleasant to uncomfortable. I had been living independently for 8 months, and I felt like I had finally hit my stride, financially and emotionally. My budget was balanced, my social life was fulfilling, and my relationship with Dad had stabilized into a new normal of regular visits and phone calls. It was during one of these phone calls that Dad mentioned something that would change everything I thought I knew about our financial arrangement. He was telling me about his plans for a vacation to Colorado, his first real trip in years. "I've been saving up for this for a while," he said. "I finally have enough put away to take a nice long trip without worrying about the expense." "That's great, Dad," I said genuinely. "You deserve a vacation. You've been working so hard for so many years." "Well, the business has been doing well, and I've been careful about saving money. Plus, I had some extra income from the rent situation that helped me build up my savings faster than I expected." Extra income from the rent situation. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Extra income. Not money that was covering actual expenses. Not funds that were being saved for my benefit, but extra income that Dad had been using to build up his own savings account. "What do you mean by extra income?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, the money you were paying for rent," Dad explained matter-of-factly. "It wasn't like I was spending all of it on household expenses. Most of it went into savings, which is how I can afford this vacation." I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. After years of wondering, years of hoping, years of giving Dad the benefit of the doubt, he had just casually confirmed my worst suspicions. The rent money I had worked so hard to earn, the money that had forced me to work multiple jobs throughout college and sacrifice social opportunities and academic performance, had been Dad's extra income. "So the money I paid you wasn't actually covering my share of household expenses?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Well, some of it was," Dad said, apparently oblivious to my emotional state. "But not all of it. I mean, you weren't really costing me $300 or $400 a month in additional expenses. But I thought it was important for you to learn responsibility, and the extra money helped me save for the future." "The future," I repeated numbly. "Right. My retirement, house improvements, emergencies, that sort of thing. It all worked out well for everyone. Everyone." I wanted to ask how this arrangement had worked out well for me, but I couldn't find my voice. I mumbled something about having to go, and ended the call as quickly as possible. I sat in my apartment that evening, staring at the box of rent receipts, and trying to process what I had just learned. For 4 years, I had believed that I was contributing to legitimate household expenses. I had defended Dad's policies to friends who thought they were unfair. I had worked myself to exhaustion to meet his financial expectations. I had compromised my education and social life to pay rent that I now knew was largely unnecessary. More than the money itself, I felt betrayed by the deception. Dad could have told me he wanted me to contribute to a family savings account. He could have explained that he was teaching me responsibility while also building up his own financial security. He could have been honest about what the money was for, instead of creating elaborate justifications about market rates and adult responsibilities. Instead, he had allowed me to believe that I was barely covering my own living expenses, when in reality I was funding his vacation plans and house improvements. He had made me feel guilty for questioning the arrangement, telling me I was ungrateful when I suggested reducing my payments or taking breaks during particularly difficult financial periods. The next few days passed in a blur of anger, hurt, and confusion. I called in sick to work, unable to concentrate on anything beyond trying to understand how the person I trusted most in the world could have misled me so completely. I replayed years of conversations in my mind, looking for clues I might have missed, explanations that might justify what Dad had done. But the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that there was no justification. Dad had taken advantage of my trust and my desire to make him proud. He had used my sense of responsibility against me, creating financial pressure that was unnecessary and counterproductive to my actual development as an independent adult. I considered confronting him directly, demanding an explanation or an apology. But I also knew that Dad would probably justify his actions by pointing to the lessons I had learned and the person I had become. He would say that the deception was necessary because I wouldn't have been as motivated to work hard if I had known the money wasn't essential for household expenses. Part of me wondered if he might be right about that. Would I have developed the same work ethic and financial discipline if I had known the rent was optional? Would I have learned to manage money as effectively if the consequences of failure hadn't seemed so immediate and serious? But those questions missed the fundamental point. The issue wasn't whether Dad's methods had been effective in teaching me responsibility. The issue was whether he had the right to deceive me about something so significant. Whether good intentions could justify dishonesty about thousands of dollars and years of unnecessary financial stress. A week after Dad's inadvertent revelation, I decided to do some research into the actual costs of maintaining his household. I wanted to understand exactly how much of my rent money had been extra income and how much had actually covered legitimate expenses. Using online tools and my knowledge of Dad's house, I researched typical utility costs, property taxes, mortgage payments, and maintenance expenses for a property like his. I also looked up grocery costs for a household of 2 adults, since Dad had always claimed that my food consumption was a significant expense. The results were exactly what I had suspected. Even accounting for my share of all household expenses, including a generous allowance for food and utilities, my actual contribution to household costs should have been no more than $200 per month during most of the time I was paying rent. That meant that over the course of 4 years, Dad had collected approximately $6,000 in truly extra income from me. $6,000 that I had earned through exhausting work schedules, that I had sacrificed social opportunities and academic performance to provide, that I had paid while believing I was barely covering my own living expenses. $6,000 that could have changed the trajectory of my college experience and early adult life if I had been able to keep it or save it for my own future goals. As I sat with these calculations, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and anger were still there, but they were joined by a clear sense of determination. I deserved to know the truth about what had happened to my money. I deserved an honest conversation about Dad's motivations and decisions. And I deserved an acknowledgement that his methods, whatever their intentions, had caused me real harm. I called Dad and asked if we could meet for dinner at a neutral location. I suggested a restaurant we both liked, somewhere public but quiet enough for a serious conversation. He agreed, probably thinking I wanted to continue rebuilding our relationship after the rocky period following my move. The restaurant was busy but not crowded when we met on a Thursday evening. Dad looked relaxed and happy, probably still excited about his upcoming vacation. He asked about my work and my apartment, making pleasant conversation while we looked at our menus and ordered our food. I waited until after our meals arrived to bring up the subject that had been consuming my thoughts for the past week. "Dad," I said carefully, "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, when you mentioned that the rent money I paid you was extra income that helped you save for your vacation." Dad's expression became cautious, as if he sensed that this conversation was heading somewhere he might not want to go. "What about it?" "I guess I'm confused about the whole arrangement," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and non-accusatory. "For 4 years, you told me that the rent I was paying was necessary to cover my share of household expenses. You showed me calculations and explained how much everything cost. But now you're saying that most of that money was actually extra income for you." Dad put down his fork and looked at me directly. "Sarah, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. The money you paid me served multiple purposes. Yes, some of it covered your actual expenses, but the rest of it was an investment in your education and character development. I was teaching you responsibility and work ethic, Lessons that have clearly served you well in your adult life. But you weren't honest with me about what the money was for, I said, my voice beginning to rise despite my efforts to stay calm. You told me I was barely covering my own living costs, when in reality, I was paying you thousands of dollars more than my actual expenses required. I was protecting you from information that might have undermined the lessons I was trying to teach, Dad replied, his own voice taking on a defensive tone. If you had known that the money wasn't strictly necessary, you might not have worked as hard or taken the responsibility as seriously. That wasn't your decision to make, I said firmly. I had the right to know what my money was being used for. I had the right to make informed decisions about my own finances and my own life. Dad's expression hardened, and I could see the conversation was not going the way he had expected. You were a teenager living in my house, eating my food, using my utilities. I had every right to establish the terms of your residency. The fact that I used some of the money for savings rather than immediate expenses doesn't change the fundamental principle. The fundamental principle of what? I asked. Lying to your daughter about money? Creating unnecessary financial stress during the most challenging years of her education? Taking advantage of her trust and desire to make you proud? I never lied to you, Dad said angrily. I taught you responsibility and prepared you for the real world. Look at yourself now. You're financially stable, hardworking, and independent. You think that happened by accident? I think it happened because I'm intelligent and determined, I replied. I think it would have happened regardless of whether you charged me rent. And I think it could have happened without the deception and the unnecessary stress. The conversation continued for another hour, growing increasingly heated, as we both struggled to make the other understand our perspective. Dad insisted that his methods had been necessary and effective, that the deception had been a minor element in a larger educational strategy that had clearly worked. I tried to explain that the issue wasn't the effectiveness of his methods, but the dishonesty involved, the breach of trust, and the unnecessary hardship he had created. I tried to make him understand that I felt exploited and manipulated, that our relationship had been built on a foundation of deception that I was only now beginning to understand. But we seemed to be speaking different languages. Dad saw a successful educational experiment that had produced a responsible, independent daughter. I saw a betrayal of trust that had colored my entire transition to adulthood and created financial hardship that could have been avoided. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Dad made one final attempt to justify his actions. Sarah, I know you're upset, but I want you to consider something. You have $13,000 worth of life experience and character development that money can't buy. You have work ethic and financial discipline that will serve you for the rest of your life. That's worth more than any amount of money I could give you. You're right, I said quietly. I do have work ethic and financial discipline, but I also have trust issues and resentment that I'm going to have to work through. And I have 4 years of memories tainted by the knowledge that the person I trusted most was lying to me about something so fundamental to my daily life. Dad looked hurt by my words, but I could see that he still didn't truly understand my perspective. To him, the ends justified the means. The positive outcomes of his strategy outweighed any negative effects of the deception involved. To me, the deception was the issue. The fact that his methods had worked didn't erase the fundamental breach of trust that had occurred. The fact that I had become a responsible adult didn't justify the unnecessary stress and hardship I had endured during my formative years. We parted that evening with our relationship more strained than it had ever been. Dad was hurt and defensive, unable to understand why I couldn't simply appreciate the positive results of his parenting strategy. I was angry and betrayed, struggling to reconcile the father I had loved and trusted with the person who had deceived me so completely. Over the following weeks, I found myself analyzing every aspect of my relationship with Dad, looking for other areas where he might have been less than honest, or where his good intentions might have justified questionable methods. I wondered if the trust issues I was experiencing would affect other relationships in my life, if I would always be suspicious of people's motivations even when they claimed to have my best interests at heart. I also found myself questioning my own judgment and instincts. How had I failed to see through Dad's deception for so many years? What other situations in my life might involve people taking advantage of my trust or my desire to please them? Had my eagerness to make Dad proud made me vulnerable to manipulation in ways I hadn't recognized? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the money itself wasn't really the issue. $6,000 was a significant amount, but it wasn't life-changing wealth. What bothered me was the principle of the thing, the violation of trust, and the way Dad had used my own positive qualities against me. My desire to be responsible, my respect for his authority, my trust in his guidance, my eagerness to make him proud, these had all been turned into tools for extracting money from me under false pretenses. The very qualities that made me a good daughter had been exploited in service of a deception that Dad justified as character building. A month after our confrontational dinner, Dad called to tell me about his Colorado vacation. He sounded relaxed and happy, describing the mountain scenery and the hiking trails he had explored. He seemed to have moved past our argument completely, as if the conversation had never happened. "I'm glad you're having a good time," I said politely when he finished describing his adventures. "I really needed this break," Dad replied. "It's amazing what a little financial security can do for your peace of mind. I'm so grateful that I was able to save up enough money to take a trip like this without worrying about the cost." The casual reference to his financial security, built at least partially on my extra income, felt like salt in a wound that was still healing. But I didn't respond to the provocation, simply ending the call with polite wishes for the rest of his vacation. That evening, I made a decision that had been forming in the back of my mind for weeks. I was going to write Dad a letter explaining exactly how his deception had affected me and what I needed from him to repair our relationship. I wanted to give him one more chance to understand my perspective and to acknowledge the harm his actions had caused. I spent hours crafting the letter, trying to strike the right balance between honesty and respect, between expressing my hurt and maintaining hope for reconciliation. I explained how the discovery of his deception had affected my ability to trust, how the unnecessary financial stress had impacted my college experience, and how his refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing was preventing me from moving forward. I also tried to acknowledge the positive aspects of my upbringing and the valuable lessons he had taught me. I didn't want the letter to be purely accusatory or to deny the ways his parenting had benefited me. But I needed him to understand that good outcomes didn't justify dishonest methods, and that his intentions, however positive, didn't erase the harm his deception had caused. The letter was 3 pages long when I finished it, covering everything from my initial confusion about the rent arrangement to my current struggle with trust issues. I read it several times, making small edits and adjustments, before finally printing it out and putting it in an envelope. I mailed the letter on a Friday afternoon, then spent the weekend alternating between hope that Dad would finally understand my perspective and fear that the letter would only make our relationship worse. I had laid out my feelings as clearly and respectfully as I could, but I had no idea how he would respond. Dad called me the following Tuesday evening. His voice was subdued, lacking the usual confidence and authority I was accustomed to hearing from him. "I got your letter," he said without preamble. "I've read it several times, and I've been thinking about what you said." "And?" I asked, my heart racing. "And I think I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Not for teaching you responsibility or for preparing you for independence, but for not being honest with you about what the money was for. You're right that you deserve to know the truth about your own finances." I felt a rush of relief and vindication. Finally, Dad was acknowledging that his deception had been wrong, regardless of his intentions or the positive outcomes it might have produced. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot to me. I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you or to take advantage of your trust," Dad continued. "I genuinely believed that the lessons you were learning were worth more than the money involved. But I can see now that the deception was wrong, and that it's damaged our relationship in ways I didn't anticipate." We talked for over an hour that night, the first honest conversation we had shared about the rent arrangement since it began. Dad explained his reasoning in more detail, acknowledging that his fear of undermining the lessons had led him to be less than truthful about the financial realities. I explained how the deception had affected me, how it had created unnecessary stress and self-doubt, and how his refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing had compounded the initial hurt. We both cried during that conversation, mourning the trust that had been lost and expressing hope that it could eventually be rebuilt. "What can I do to make this right?" Dad asked toward the end of our call. I had been thinking about that question for weeks, and I had an answer ready. "I want the extra money back," I said firmly. "Not all of it, because I understand that some of what I paid did cover legitimate expenses. But the $6,000 that was truly extra income, I want that returned to me." Dad was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear him calculating numbers in his head. $6,000, he repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I think that's a fair estimate of what you overpaid. I can write you a check this week." "I don't want it as a gift or as charity," I clarified. "I want it acknowledged as money that was mine all along, money that I earned and should have been able to keep or save for my own goals." "You're absolutely right," Dad agreed. "It was your money, and you should have had control over what happened to it. I'll write you a check for $6,000, and I'll include a note acknowledging that this is a return of money that belonged to you." 3 days later, I received an envelope in the mail containing a check for $6,000 and a handwritten note from Dad. The note was brief but meaningful. "Sarah, this money represents the portion of your rent payments that exceeded your actual living expenses. It was always yours, and I should have been honest about that from the beginning. I hope returning it to you is a first step toward rebuilding the trust I damaged. Love, Dad." Holding that check felt surreal. $6,000. Enough to pay off my remaining student loans, or to build a substantial emergency fund, or to make a down payment on a car. Money that I had earned through years of exhausting work schedules. Money that I had believed was necessary for basic survival. Money that had been mine all along. But more important than the money itself was what it represented. Dad's acknowledgement that he had been wrong. His recognition that my feelings were valid and that his deception had caused real harm. His willingness to take concrete action to make amends, rather than simply offering empty apologies. I deposited the check that afternoon, then called Dad to thank him. Our conversation was awkward but hopeful, with both of us clearly wanting to repair our relationship but uncertain about how to move forward. "I know it's going to take time to rebuild trust," Dad said, "but I want you to know that I'm committed to being more honest with you going forward. No more deceptions, even if I think they're for your own good." "That's all I ask," I replied. "I don't need you to be perfect, but I do need you to be honest. A relationship has to be built on trust, not on what you think is best for me to know." Over the following months, Dad and I worked slowly but steadily to repair our relationship. He made a conscious effort to be more transparent about his thoughts and decisions, and I made an effort to give him credit for his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and make amends. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old patterns would resurface, when Dad would make decisions for me without consulting me, or when I would question his motivations, even when he was being completely honest. But we both recognized that rebuilding trust was a process that would take time and patience. 6 months after receiving the check, I used part of the money to pay off my student loans completely. The feeling of financial freedom was incredible. No more monthly loan payments, no more interest accumulating, no more debt hanging over my head as I tried to build my adult life. I used another portion of the money to build up my emergency fund, creating a financial safety net that gave me confidence and peace of mind. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly financially secure, able to handle unexpected expenses or temporary income disruptions without panic or stress. The rest of the money I saved for future goals, a down payment on a house perhaps, or funding for graduate school if I decided to pursue further education. Having those options available felt empowering in a way I had never experienced before. But the most valuable thing I gained from the entire experience wasn't the money itself. It was a deeper understanding of my own worth, and my right to honesty and respect in all my relationships. The situation with Dad had taught me that good intentions don't justify deception, that love doesn't excuse manipulation, and that I have the right to expect transparency from the people I trust. These lessons served me well in other areas of my life. I became more assertive in my professional relationships, more careful about recognizing manipulation in personal relationships, and more confident in standing up for myself when I felt I was being treated unfairly. I also developed a greater appreciation for the complexity of family relationships and the challenges of parenting. While I still believed Dad's methods had been wrong, I could understand his desire to prepare me for independence and his fear that honesty might undermine important lessons. A year after our confrontational dinner, Dad and I had established a new normal in our relationship. We saw each other regularly, talked openly about our thoughts and feelings, and had learned to navigate disagreements without the underlying deception that had poisoned our interactions for so many years. Dad never again tried to charge me money or to manipulate me through financial means. When I occasionally needed help, when my car broke down, when I was between jobs for a few weeks, he offered assistance freely and without conditions, the way a parent should. I never again accepted his help without questioning his motivations or asking for clarity about expectations. I had learned to be grateful for genuine assistance while remaining vigilant against manipulation disguised as generosity. Our relationship was different than it had been during my childhood, more equal and more honest, but also more cautious and less automatically trusting. We both had to work harder to maintain it, but in many ways it was stronger for having survived such a significant crisis. Looking back on the entire experience, I feel grateful for the lessons I learned, even though I wish I had learned them in a different way. I gained financial literacy, work ethic, and independence, all valuable qualities that have served me well in my adult life. But I also gained skepticism, self-advocacy skills, and a clear understanding of my own worth, qualities that might have taken much longer to develop if I hadn't been forced to question authority and stand up for myself in such a fundamental way. The money Dad returned to me became the foundation for my financial future, but the trust I learned to place in myself became the foundation for everything else. I learned that I could survive betrayal, that I could stand up to authority figures when necessary, and that I could rebuild relationships on healthier terms when both parties were willing to do the work. Most importantly, I learned that family love doesn't excuse dishonesty, that good intentions don't justify harmful actions, and that true respect means treating someone as capable of handling the truth, even when that truth is complicated or uncomfortable. These lessons have shaped every relationship and decision in my adult life, creating a foundation of self-respect and authenticity that no amount of money could have purchased. In the end, Dad's deception taught me more about trust, honesty, and my own worth than any lecture or life lesson could have accomplished. The experience was painful, but it was also transformative. It forced me to grow up in ways I hadn't expected, to question assumptions I had never examined, and to develop strength I didn't know I possessed. And perhaps most surprisingly, it ultimately brought Dad and me closer together than we had ever been before. By working through such a fundamental breach of trust, we learned to communicate more honestly, to respect each other's perspectives, and to build a relationship based on mutual understanding rather than assumed authority. 2 years have passed since Dad returned the money, and our relationship has evolved into something neither of us expected when this journey began. We've learned to navigate the delicate balance between his protective instincts and my need for autonomy, between respecting his experience and trusting my own judgment. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns would emerge, conversations that ended in frustration rather than understanding. But gradually we developed new ways of communicating that honored both his desire to guide me and my need to make my own decisions. One of the most significant changes came when I decided to pursue a graduate degree in business administration. Instead of making the decision independently and informing Dad afterward, I chose to involve him in the process from the beginning. Not because I needed his permission or his financial support, but because I wanted his perspective and his expertise. "I've been thinking about going back to school," I told him during one of our regular Sunday dinners. "An MBA program that I could do part-time while still working." Dad's eyes lit up with interest, but I could see him carefully measuring his response. The old Dad might have immediately launched into advice about costs and benefits, practical considerations, and potential pitfalls. The new Dad asked questions instead. "What's driving this decision?" he asked. "Are you feeling limited in your current role? Or are you thinking about a career change?" We spent 2 hours that evening discussing my career goals, the potential benefits of additional education, and the practical challenges of balancing work and school. Dad shared his observations about the business world and the value of advanced degrees, but he never once told me what I should do or tried to influence my decision through financial pressure. When I ultimately decided to apply to the program, Dad offered to help me prepare for the GMAT and to review my application essays. His feedback was invaluable, but it came without strings attached, without subtle manipulation, without hidden agendas. He was simply a father helping his daughter pursue her goals. The contrast with our previous dynamic was stark. When I had been preparing for undergraduate college applications, Dad's help had come with lectures about financial responsibility and expectations about how I would pay for my education. Now, his assistance was freely given and gratefully received, with no underlying tension about control or manipulation. Starting graduate school while working full-time was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. The coursework was demanding, requiring significant time and mental energy outside of my regular job responsibilities. There were evenings when I would come home exhausted from work only to face hours of studying, weekends consumed by group projects and research papers. During this period, Dad proved to be an unexpected source of support and encouragement. He would call to check on my progress, not to monitor or control, but simply to offer encouragement. When I was struggling with a particularly difficult course in financial analysis, he offered to tutor me, drawing on his years of business experience to help me understand complex concepts. "You know, this reminds me of when you were in high school and having trouble with algebra," he said one evening as we worked through present value calculations. "You were so frustrated, but you kept working at it until everything clicked. You have that same determination now." His confidence in my abilities meant more to me than any grade or professional achievement. For the first time in years, I felt like Dad and I were on the same team, working toward shared goals rather than engaged in some complex power struggle about independence and control. The financial aspects of graduate school also provided an opportunity to demonstrate how much our relationship had changed. The program was expensive, and while my employer provided some tuition assistance, I was still facing significant out-of-pocket costs. When Dad learned about my financial situation, he made an offer that surprised me. "I'd like to help with your tuition," he said during one of our study sessions. "Not as a loan, not with any expectations or conditions, but as a gift from a father who's proud of his daughter's ambition and wants to support her goals." In the past, I might have been suspicious of such an offer, wondering what strings were attached or what lessons Dad was trying to teach. But his transparency over the previous 2 years had rebuilt my trust to the point where I could accept his generosity at face value. "Are you sure?" I asked. "It's a lot of money, and I don't want you to sacrifice your own financial security for my education." "I'm sure," Dad replied firmly. "I've been saving money for years, partially with the idea that I might someday want to help you with something important. This seems like exactly the right use for those savings." His willingness to be transparent about his financial situation and his motivations meant everything to me. There were no mysterious calculations, no vague references to teaching responsibility, no hidden agendas. Just a straightforward offer from a parent who wanted to help his child succeed. I accepted his help gratefully, but I also insisted on maintaining some financial contribution of my own. We agreed that he would cover 60% of my tuition costs while I handled the remaining 40% plus all my living expenses. This arrangement allowed me to accept his generosity while maintaining my independence and personal responsibility. The graduate program challenged me academically and professionally in ways I hadn't expected. I was taking classes with accomplished professionals from various industries, many of whom had significantly more work experience than I did. Initially, I felt intimidated by their expertise and confidence, worried that I didn't belong in such competitive company. Dad became an unexpected source of perspective during these moments of self-doubt. "You earned your place in that program," he reminded me when I expressed concerns about keeping up with my classmates. "The admissions committee saw something in you that convinced them you could succeed. Trust their judgment, and more importantly, trust yourself." His encouragement helped me find my voice in class discussions and group projects. I learned to contribute my own unique perspective rather than trying to mimic the approaches of more experienced students. I discovered that my relative youth and fresh perspective were assets rather than liabilities in many situations. One of the most valuable aspects of the MBA program was the case study methodology, which required students to analyze real business problems and propose solutions. Many of these cases involved family businesses, succession planning, and the challenges of balancing family relationships with business objectives. Working through these cases gave me new insight into Dad's perspective during my teenage years. I could see how business owners might struggle with decisions about involving family members in their enterprises, how they might use business principles to address family situations, and how their desire to prepare their children for the business world might sometimes conflict with traditional parenting approaches. I didn't excuse Dad's deception about the rent money, but I gained a better understanding of the complex motivations that might have driven his decisions. Business owners are accustomed to making tough decisions for the long-term benefit of their enterprises, even when those decisions are unpopular or misunderstood in the short term. Dad had applied that same mindset to parenting, with mixed results. During my second year of graduate school, I completed a summer internship with a consulting firm that specialized in family business dynamics. The experience was eye-opening, exposing me to dozens of families struggling to balance personal relationships with business requirements. I met parents who had worked alongside their children for decades, without ever establishing clear boundaries between family and business roles. I saw siblings whose relationships had been destroyed by disagreements over business strategy or succession planning. I encountered families where financial entanglements had created resentment and mistrust that lasted for generations. These experiences gave me a new appreciation for the importance of transparency and clear communication in family financial relationships. I saw how easily misunderstandings could develop when family members made assumptions about each other's motivations or intentions. I witnessed the damage that could result when financial arrangements were based on unstated expectations or hidden agendas. One case that particularly resonated with me involved a father who had been charging his adult son rent to live in the family home, while also secretly saving that money to eventually help the son purchase his own house. The father's intentions were good, but his lack of transparency had created resentment and suspicion that damaged their relationship even after the truth was revealed. "Why didn't you just tell him what you were doing?" I asked during a family meeting I was facilitating. "I wanted him to learn responsibility," the father replied. "I was afraid that if he knew I was saving the money for him, he wouldn't take the payments seriously." The son's response was immediate and emotional. "You didn't trust me to be responsible unless you tricked me into it. How is that supposed to make me feel trusted or respected?" The parallels to my own situation with Dad were obvious and painful. I could see how both fathers had genuinely believed they were acting in their children's best interests, but had chosen methods that undermined trust and created unnecessary conflict. After facilitating that particular family meeting, I called Dad to share what I had learned. "I've been working with a family that has a situation very similar to what we went through," I told him. "It's given me some new perspective on how complicated these family financial dynamics can be." Dad was quiet for a moment before responding. "I imagine it has. I've been thinking a lot lately about the choices I made when you were younger. I can see now that there were probably better ways to teach you the lessons I wanted you to learn." "I think the key is transparency," I said. "Even when parents have good intentions, keeping secrets about money creates problems that are hard to fix later." "You're absolutely right," Dad agreed. "I should have trusted you to handle the truth about what I was trying to accomplish." My fear of undermining the lessons ended up undermining our relationship instead. These conversations helped us both process the lingering effects of our earlier conflicts. Dad was able to articulate more clearly why he had made the choices he did, while I was able to explain more specifically how those choices had affected me. We weren't relitigating old grievances, but rather gaining deeper understanding that helped prevent similar problems in the future. As I progressed through graduate school, I began to consider my long-term career goals more seriously. The MBA program had exposed me to various industries and business functions, helping me identify areas where I wanted to focus my professional development. I was particularly drawn to organizational development and change management, fields that combined my interest in business strategy with my passion for helping people navigate complex transitions. When I mentioned this interest to Dad, he surprised me with a suggestion. "Have you ever thought about working with family businesses? Your experience with our situation, combined with your formal education and consulting background, might make you uniquely qualified to help other families navigate similar challenges. The idea hadn't occurred to me, but the more I thought about it, the more appealing it became. I had firsthand experience with the complexities of family financial relationships, academic training in business and organizational behavior, and practical experience facilitating difficult family conversations through my internship. I began researching career opportunities in family business consulting and discovered a growing field of professionals who specialized in helping family enterprises address succession planning, governance issues, and relationship challenges. Many of these consultants had backgrounds similar to mine: business education combined with personal experience in family business dynamics. With Dad's encouragement, I decided to focus my final semester coursework on family business topics. I wrote my capstone project on the importance of transparent communication in family financial relationships, drawing on both academic research and my own experiences. The project received excellent feedback from my professors and sparked my interest in potentially pursuing a career in this specialized field. As graduation approached, I reflected on how much my life had changed since the day I first learned that Dad had been charging me rent. What had begun as a painful betrayal of trust had evolved into a catalyst for personal growth, professional development, and ultimately a stronger relationship with my father. The financial skills I had developed during those challenging years had served me well throughout graduate school and my early career. The independence and self-advocacy, abilities I had been forced to cultivate, had helped me navigate academic and professional challenges with confidence. The insights I had gained about family dynamics and communication had opened up new career possibilities I never would have considered otherwise. Most importantly, the process of working through our conflicts had taught both Dad and me valuable lessons about honesty, respect, and the importance of treating family members as capable adults worthy of truth and transparency. My graduation ceremony was held on a beautiful spring afternoon, with families gathered to celebrate their loved ones' achievements. Dad was there, beaming with pride as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. After the ceremony, he gave me a huge hug and told me how proud he was of everything I had accomplished. "You've come so far," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just academically, but personally. You've become such a strong, independent woman, and you've done it while maintaining your compassion and your commitment to family." "I couldn't have done it without your support," I replied truthfully. "Especially these past few years. Having you believe in me and support my goals has meant everything." Later that evening, as we celebrated with dinner at my favorite restaurant, Dad presented me with an unexpected gift. It was a leather portfolio containing a letter he had written, along with a substantial check. "I wanted to give you something to mark this achievement," he said. "The money is a graduation gift, but the letter is more important. I wanted to put in writing some thoughts about our journey and what I've learned from it." I opened the letter and read it while Dad waited nervously. In it, he acknowledged again the mistakes he had made during my teenage years, expressed pride in the woman I had become, and shared his hopes for my future. But the most meaningful part was his reflection on what our relationship had taught him about parenting and family dynamics. "I realize now that my job as your father was never to control your choices or manipulate you into learning lessons I thought were important," he had written. "My job was to provide you with information, support, and encouragement, then trust you to make good decisions with those resources. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand the difference." The letter concluded with his thoughts about my potential career in family business consulting. "You have a unique combination of personal experience, professional training, and natural empathy that could help many families avoid the mistakes we made. I hope you'll consider using your talents in this field, not to right our past wrongs, but to help others build stronger, more honest relationships from the beginning." Reading Dad's letter was emotional and cathartic. It represented a level of self-reflection and vulnerability that I hadn't expected from him, and it demonstrated how much he had grown and changed since our confrontational period. More than any apology or financial restitution, his willingness to examine his own motivations and acknowledge his mistakes showed me that our relationship had truly been repaired and strengthened. 6 months after graduation, I accepted a position with a consulting firm that specialized in family business advisory services. The role combined strategic consulting with family dynamics counseling, helping business families navigate succession planning, governance development, and conflict resolution. My first major client was a third-generation manufacturing company where the founder's grandchildren were struggling to work together effectively. The family had never established clear communication protocols or decision-making processes, leading to confusion, resentment, and declining business performance. Working with this family felt like coming full circle. I was able to use my academic training to analyze their business challenges, while drawing on my personal experience to understand the emotional dynamics underlying their conflicts. The combination of analytical and empathetic approaches proved effective in helping them develop solutions that addressed both practical and relational concerns. Dad followed my career progress with interest and pride, but also with careful respect for my professional independence. He would ask about my work during our regular conversations, offering encouragement and perspective when I faced challenging situations, but never trying to provide unsolicited advice or second-guess my decisions. When I told him about my success with the manufacturing family, he smiled and said, "It sounds like you found your calling." There's something satisfying about using your own difficult experiences to help others avoid similar problems. "I think you're right," I replied. "This work feels meaningful in a way that pure business consulting never did. I'm helping families build stronger relationships while also improving their business performance." As my consulting practice grew, I began to specialize in cases involving financial transparency and communication issues between generations. Many of the families I worked with were struggling with situations similar to what Dad and I had experienced. Well-intentioned parents making financial decisions for their children without adequate communication, adult children feeling manipulated or deceived, and both generations struggling to balance independence with family loyalty. These cases reinforced my belief in the importance of honest communication about money and expectations within families. I developed frameworks and tools to help families establish clear agreements about financial responsibilities, discuss money-related decisions openly, and resolve conflicts that arose from misunderstandings or breaches of trust. One case that particularly challenged me involved a father who had been secretly saving money from his daughter's rent payments, planning to surprise her with the accumulated funds when she got married. The daughter had discovered the arrangement and felt betrayed, much as I had when I learned about Dad's deception. "I was trying to help her," the father explained during our initial meeting. "I wanted her to learn responsibility while also building up savings for her future. I thought surprising her with the money would be the best of both worlds." "But you didn't give her the choice," his daughter replied angrily. "You decided what was best for me without even asking what I wanted or needed. How is that respectful or helpful?" As I facilitated their conversations, I found myself drawing heavily on my own experiences with Dad. I could understand both perspectives: the father's desire to provide for his daughter's future while teaching important lessons, and the daughter's feelings of betrayal and manipulation. "The impact of your actions matters more than your intentions," I told the father gently. Even when parents have good motivations, children deserve to know the truth about financial arrangements that affect them. Trust is more important than any specific lesson you might want to teach. Working through this case was emotionally challenging because it forced me to relive some of my own painful experiences. But it also confirmed my belief that transparency and honest communication were essential for healthy family relationships, regardless of the specific financial arrangements involved. After successfully helping this family rebuild their relationship and establish new communication protocols, I realized that my work was providing healing not just for my clients, but for myself as well. Each family I helped work through financial conflicts brought me greater peace about my own experiences and deeper appreciation for the growth Dad and I had achieved. 3 years into my consulting career, I was invited to speak at a conference on family business governance. My presentation topic was "The Hidden Costs of Good Intentions: Why Financial Transparency Matters in Family Relationships." The audience included business owners, family members, and other professionals who worked with family enterprises. During my presentation, I shared some of my own experiences with Dad, carefully disguising identifying details, but speaking honestly about the impact of financial deception on family relationships. The response was overwhelming, with many audience members approaching me afterward to share their own similar stories. "Thank you for being so honest about your own family's challenges," said one woman whose father had charged her rent throughout college without explaining that he was investing the money for her future. "I thought our situation was unique, but hearing your story makes me realize how common these problems are." A business owner in his 60s approached me with tears in his eyes. "I've been doing something similar with my son," he admitted. I thought I was teaching him responsibility, but after hearing your presentation, I realize I might be damaging our relationship instead. These conversations reinforced my belief that financial transparency issues were widespread among families, often stemming from good intentions but causing real harm to relationships and trust. I began to see my consulting work not just as a career, but as a mission to help families avoid the pain and conflict that Dad and I had experienced. Following the conference, I received several inquiries from families wanting to work with me specifically because of my willingness to share my own experiences. They appreciated having a consultant who understood their challenges not just academically but personally. Dad was proud of my growing reputation in the field, but he was also somewhat apprehensive about my public discussion of our family's challenges. "Are you comfortable sharing such personal information with strangers?" he asked after I told him about the conference presentation. "I think our story can help other families avoid similar problems," I replied. "Obviously, I'm careful about privacy and confidentiality, but I believe there's value in being honest about the lessons we've learned." Dad considered this for a moment before nodding. "If our experiences can help other families, then I suppose there's some positive purpose to what we went through. I'm proud of you for being willing to be vulnerable in service of helping others." His support meant everything to me, confirming that we had truly moved beyond our past conflicts, and were now united in wanting to help others avoid similar problems. Dad's willingness to have our story shared, even in disguised form, demonstrated his commitment to the lessons we had both learned about transparency and honest communication. As I established myself more firmly in the family business consulting field, I began to develop innovative approaches to helping families address financial transparency issues. One tool I created was a family financial charter that helped families establish clear agreements about money-related expectations, responsibilities, and communication protocols. The charter process required families to discuss and document their values, expectations, and boundaries around financial relationships. It covered topics like financial support between generations, expectations for adult children living at home, transparency requirements for family financial decisions, and protocols for addressing conflicts when they arose. Many families found the charter process challenging because it required them to have explicit conversations about topics they had previously handled through assumptions and unspoken expectations. But those who completed the process reported significant improvements in their relationships and much greater clarity about financial roles and responsibilities. I also developed workshops for parents of teenage and young adult children, focusing on how to teach financial responsibility without compromising trust or creating unnecessary conflict. These workshops covered topics like setting appropriate financial expectations, maintaining transparency about household economics, and helping young adults develop financial skills without creating artificial hardships. The workshops were consistently well attended and received positive feedback from participants. Many parents expressed gratitude for practical guidance on navigating the complex balance between preparing their children for independence and maintaining healthy family relationships. "I wish I had attended something like this when my daughter was 16, said one father after a workshop. "I made so many mistakes trying to teach her responsibility, and it took years to repair the damage to our relationship." Comments like these reinforced my belief that many parents struggle with similar challenges and could benefit from frameworks and tools for approaching financial education more thoughtfully and transparently. 5 years after completing my MBA, I was invited to co-author a book on family financial dynamics with a leading expert in the field. The book, titled Money and Family: Building Trust Through Financial Transparency, combined academic research with practical guidance and real-world case studies. Writing the book gave me an opportunity to synthesize everything I had learned through my personal experiences, academic studies, and consulting practice. It also provided a platform to share the insights Dad and I had gained through our own difficult journey toward rebuilding trust and communication. The chapter I was most proud of was titled, When Good Intentions Go Wrong: The Hidden Costs of Financial Deception in Families. In it, I shared a detailed case study based on my experiences with Dad, along with analysis of the psychological and relational factors that contribute to financial transparency problems in families. Even well-intentioned financial arrangements can damage family relationships when they involve deception or manipulation. I wrote, Parents who use financial pressure to teach lessons may achieve their short-term educational goals while undermining the long-term trust and communication that healthy family relationships require. The book was well received by both academic and practitioner audiences, and it led to additional speaking opportunities and consulting engagements. More importantly, it provided a way for Dad and me to share what we had learned with a broader audience, potentially helping many families avoid similar conflicts. Dad was deeply moved when he read the book, particularly the sections that dealt with our own experiences. "You've managed to take something painful and turn it into something helpful for others," he told me. "That takes real strength and wisdom." "We both contributed to that wisdom," I replied. "Your willingness to acknowledge mistakes and work toward rebuilding our relationship made it possible for me to learn and grow from the experience." As my career continued to develop, I found myself increasingly sought after as an expert on family financial dynamics. I was invited to serve on the board of a nonprofit organization that provided education and resources to family businesses, and I began teaching part-time at a local university, sharing my knowledge with the next generation of family business professionals. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of my work was the ongoing relationships I developed with the families I served. Many clients stayed in touch long after our formal consulting engagements ended, sharing updates on their progress and seeking occasional guidance as new challenges arose. One client wrote to me several years after our work together, "The frameworks you helped us develop have transformed not just our business relationships, but our entire family dynamic. We're communicating more honestly about everything now, not just money. Thank you for helping us learn to trust each other again." Messages like this reminded me daily of why I had chosen this career path and why the difficult experiences with Dad had ultimately been so valuable. Our pain had been transformed into purpose, our conflicts had become catalysts for helping others, and our journey toward reconciliation had provided a roadmap that other families could follow. 10 years have passed since I first learned that Dad had been charging me rent under false pretenses. Our relationship today is stronger and more honest than it has ever been. We've learned to communicate openly about difficult topics, to respect each other's perspectives even when we disagree, and to maintain appropriate boundaries while still enjoying a close family bond. Dad is now in his early 70s, still active in his business but beginning to think about retirement and succession planning. We've had several conversations about his long-term plans, discussions that are characterized by the transparency and mutual respect that were so lacking during my teenage years. "I want to make sure I handle this transition better than I handled your transition to adulthood," he told me recently. "I want to be clear about my plans and expectations rather than springing surprises on you later." His commitment to transparency and open communication gives me confidence that we won't repeat the mistakes of the past. We've both learned too much and worked too hard to rebuild our relationship to risk damaging it again through deception or manipulation. I've used the $6,000 Dad returned to me in various ways over the years. Part of it funded my graduate education, part of it provided the down payment for my first house, and part of it remains in savings as an emergency fund. But more importantly, the experience of fighting for that money and ultimately receiving it taught me valuable lessons about self-advocacy, the importance of trust in relationships, and the power of honest communication to heal even serious breaches of faith. My consulting practice continues to grow and evolve, driven by my passion for helping families navigate the complex intersection of money and relationships. I've worked with hundreds of families over the years, each presenting unique challenges but all sharing the common need for transparency, respect, and clear communication about financial matters. The work is deeply satisfying because it combines my professional skills with my personal mission to help others avoid the pain and conflict that Dad and I experienced. Every family that learns to communicate more honestly about money, every parent who chooses transparency over manipulation, every adult child who develops the confidence to advocate for themselves, represents a small victory in the larger effort to build healthier family relationships. Looking back on this journey, I'm grateful for every difficult moment, every painful realization, and every challenging conversation that led Dad and me to where we are today. The experience taught us both that love and good intentions are not enough to sustain healthy relationships. Trust, respect, and honest communication are equally essential, and they require constant attention and care to maintain. The 16-year-old girl who first received that rent demand could never have imagined that the experience would ultimately lead to a career helping other families, a stronger relationship with her father, and a deep understanding of her own worth and capabilities. The pain was real, the betrayal was significant, and the journey toward healing was long and difficult. But the destination has been worth every step along the way. Today, when families ask me for advice about financial arrangements between generations, I always emphasize the importance of transparency and honest communication. Good intentions are important, I tell them, but they're not enough. Trust is built through consistent honesty, even when the truth is complicated or uncomfortable. The lessons Dad and I learned through our conflicts have become the foundation for all my professional work and personal relationships. We discovered that love without trust is fragile, that good intentions without honest communication can cause real harm, and that even serious breaches of faith can be healed when both parties are committed to growth and change. Our story doesn't have a fairy tale ending, because real life is more complex than fairy tales. We've both had to accept responsibility for our contributions to the conflicts, we've both had to forgive mistakes and move forward despite hurt feelings, and we've both had to learn new ways of relating to each other as adults rather than parent and child. But what we have now is something more valuable than a fairy tale ending. We have a relationship built on mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine understanding of each other's perspectives. We have the satisfaction of knowing that our difficult experiences have been transformed into wisdom that can benefit others. And we have the confidence that comes from surviving a serious crisis and emerging stronger on the other side. The money Dad charged me for rent was never really about the money itself. It was about control, about teaching lessons, about preparing me for independence, and ultimately about the complex dynamics between parents and children as families navigate the transition from dependence to autonomy. The resolution of our conflict was never really about getting the money back. It was about acknowledgement, about honesty, about respect, and ultimately about rebuilding trust between two people who love each other but had lost their way in the complexity of family relationships and financial responsibilities. Today, Dad and I share Sunday dinners again, but now our conversations are characterized by mutual respect and honest communication, rather than hidden agendas and unspoken expectations. We discuss our work, our goals, our concerns, and our hopes for the future, with an openness that was impossible during the years when financial deception stood between us. The pancakes taste better when they're shared without secrets, when the love behind them is expressed honestly, rather than through manipulation disguised as life lessons. The relationship we've built is imperfect, still evolving, sometimes challenging, but always honest. And that honesty makes all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.